أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وخاتم المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهر المعصومين واللعنة الدائمة الباقي لأعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. Amma ba'd, sisters and brothers in Iman, Salamun Alaikum. With the blessings of the holy month of Ramadan, we once again have the opportunity to go through various ayat of Quran. For this year, we have been looking at Surah at-Talaq, Surah number 65 of the Quran. I would like to just emphasize the point that Islam doesn't shy away from, real issues that people face in their personal, social, lives. And this is where we see that Islam is very clear about it. It's another story whether Muslims like that or not. Muslims run away from what the Quran says. But it's interesting that when I look at the responses or comments by some of the converts, those who have come new to Islam, one of the things that if you ask them what was the most appealing feature that attracted you to Islam, you will be surprised that they say, in a very positive manner, they say Islam doesn't leave you alone. Whatever you do, you want to go to washroom, Islam is with you. You want to go to office and do your own business work, Islam is with you. You want to go to a gathering of friends, Islam is with you. Whether you want to get married, Islam has an opinion there. What you can do, what you can't do. When the issue of inheritance comes, profession and career that you choose, everywhere, Islam has an opinion. Sometimes it is elaborate, sometimes it is just general guidelines, but Islam is not away from you. And this is something that, as those who are born into that faith, we really have to work on it. And as I looked at the ayat we studied together, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that these are the, وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ. Remember my blessings upon you. And then he says, what I have sent down, مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ, the earlier ayat. That what I sent down in form of the book and the wisdom. The book is the Quran and the wisdom is what comes from the Prophet as preserved by the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wassalam. And so of course this is the fifth gathering that we have on this tafsir. The earlier theme were about talaq. We will continue with the second ayat. One more issue before we go to a slightly different theme. I think people are also getting worried about talaq, so even the ayat is now slightly moving away before it comes back to the theme in a couple of verses. The ayat that we were discussing last night was the second ayat where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَإِذَا بَلَغْنَا أَجَلَهُنَّ فَأَمْسِكُهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ أَوْ فَارِقُهُنَّ بِمَعْرُوفٍ. That once they have completed their term, the iddah, for 3 months after talaq has taken place, before the conclusion of it, you had two options. Either retain them honorably or with fairness, or separate from them with ma'roof, with fairness and honor and dignity. There is no third option there, as I said last night. Then we come to this ayat, وَأَشْهِدُوا ذَوِي عَدْلٍ مِّنْكُمْ. That when the talaq is done, it cannot be done in privacy. It cannot be done just, between the couple themselves. Unlike the nikah, where witnessing is recommended in Shia fiqh, But when it comes to the talaq, there must be two witnesses from the male who are zawi adl, or who are adil. We'll come to that later on. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ends by saying, وَأَقِيمُوا الشَّهَادَ لِلَّهِ, and also referring to the witnesses, make sure that you bear witness for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ذَلِكُمْ يُوضَعَ بِهِ مَنْ كَانَ يُؤْمِنُ بِاللَّهِ وَالْيَوْمِ الْآخِرِ, whoever believes in Allah and the last day is being advised by it. So if you really believe in Allah and the Qiyamah, these are the advices and the guidelines that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is given to. Now, let me just make sure we understand the process. I mentioned last night that, there are three types of divorce. One is talaq, where the husband initiates because he doesn't like the marriage. And that is known as raj'i, revocable within the time of the iddah. The second one is khula, where the wife initiates the divorce. She doesn't want to continue the relationship. And that is known as ba'in, means it cannot be revoked by the husband. Because this is where, she doesn't want to continue that. So giving the ruju right to the husband wouldn't make sense there. And the third one is mubarat, where there is mutual dislike of one another. And that is also a ba'in, irrevocable kind of marriage. The main thing here is that the talaq, happens when the iddah, it's starting. The iddah actually starts with talaq. It's only that in the first case, in case of talaq, the number one, the talaq becomes final at the end of the iddah, because during that 3 months, the husband is given the opportunity to change his mind. If he does ruju, the talaq becomes null and void. There is no need to recite a nikah. They are still husband and wife like before. But in the second and the third type of divorces, once the talaq is recited, it becomes final. There is no issue of waiting for the 3 months for it to be finalized. Although still the wife has to go through the iddah for the reasons that we discussed last night. Now going to this ayat about witnessing. Among the Sunnis, in nikah, witnessing is necessary. In talaq, they don't need to have witness. Even if the husband says, in whatever state of mind he is alone, he says talaq, 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 is considered 3 talaq. We don't accept this. As I said, the principle behind this is that in Shia fiqh, marriage is made easy, divorce is allowed, but it is not that easy to do. And one of the hurdles, if I may say, is the issue that the talaq has to be recited in presence of 2 witnesses. And the condition is that they should be adil. Adil basically means a person of upright character who does not openly violate the Sharia laws. And so even putting this condition of adil, number one, witnessing, is one kind of restriction. Then you have to find 2 of them who are also adil, means they are not known to be openly committing, violation of the Sharia. Otherwise, they will not be qualified as proper, witnesses for talaq. So this is where we see another more, making it more difficult. And it's interesting that the Sunni fuqaha really don't. They just say it's recommended, even though the ayat of Quran is there. But you will see that even among the Sunni societies now, because of this problem, especially the 3 talaq issue that they have, that some countries like Egypt, even Pakistan actually is moving in that direction of saying that, 3 talaq done in privacy is not acceptable. The Egyptian laws have changed much earlier than other Sunni countries, and they actually are looking at the example of the Shia fiqh. And this is one area where we see that if you really want to know the Islam which is based on the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet, you have no choice but to go to the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam. Now, this statement here, وَأَقِيمُوا الشَّهَادَ لِلَّهِ, is basically addressed to the witnesses. That, and of course, even to the husband and wife in that case, that don't be biased or do not refuse to testify later on if you are witness to the talaq. Because it could happen, and this is where the issue, even though they are zawi adl. We're talking about two people who are considered to be adl, but things can change. And remember, adalat is not something you buy and then keep. It can be there, it can go away, it can come back. It's not even that, if somebody was opposite of adl is fasiq, somebody who openly commits a sin. Later on, if he repents and reforms himself, you don't say, oh, 10 saal pehle dekha tha. But you have to look at his present condition. That is where you count whether they are adil in the present time or not. And so this is where, but the emphasis even to them is that aqimu shahada lillah. Bear witnessing and testify later on when you are called to verify that this took place for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because if you were the shahid, you were the witness, and if you refuse, this is itself considered to be a sin. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala again emphasis on importance of respecting those the laws, especially the family laws. ذَلِكُمْ يُوعَظَ بِهِ. يُوضَعَ is from wa'az. Wa'iz, being advice or admonishment. Admonition here. These are the laws which, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this is wa'az for you, for those who believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the day of Qiyamah. Similar words have been used in the ayat that we discussed yesterday from Surah Baqarah, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after talking about the issue of the laws of talaq, He says, وَلَا تَتَّخِذُوا آيَاتِ اللَّهِ هُزْوًا. Do not take God's verses for mockery. These are very serious issues. They are based on hikmat and wisdom. Allah is the creator. He knows our, nature and our fitrah, and this is what He has devised for us. وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ. And remember the favor of Allah upon you. What was the favor? وَمَا أَنزَلَ عَلَيْكُمْ. What He revealed upon you مِنَ الْكِتَابِ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. From the Quran and the sayings of the Prophet. يَعِذُكُمْ بِهِ. Again, the word يُوضَعَ here, and يَعِذُكُمْ in Surah Baqarah. From the same root, wa'az. Admonishing you thereby. And so we see it's just two ayahs that we have gone through. But already, besides describing the laws, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is emphasizing that do not take these things lightly. These are serious issues, and Allah will hold you accountable for them. Now we change the topic. Salawat pढ़ने एक बार. Although the context of this next theme is relevant to talaq situation, but the message is universal. This is very common. Sometimes, for example, there might be an event where somebody did something and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals the ayat. But it doesn't mean that it only applies to that individual. For example, there is an ayat in Quran, in Surah Hujurat, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنْ جَاءَكُمْ فَاسِقٌ بِنَبَإٍ تَبَيَّنُوا. O you who believe, if a sinful person who is not adil, who is fasiq, comes to you with a news about someone else, or a tribe or a group, فَتَبَيَّنُوا. Do not just accept his words. Do investigation before you act on it. Now this was revealed about a specific event in the life of the Prophet. And where Walid, who was from Banu Umayyah, later a very prominent figure in the third Khilafat and in the camp of Muawiyah. But he is somebody who is known as Fasiq according to the words of Quran. And he was Fasiq till the end. He's the one who, as a governor of Kufa in Usman's Khilafat, one day was so much drunk that in Fajr namaz he recited 4, and then he says, "Do you want me to add more?" Instead of 2. So you have these kinds of people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayat. If a fasiq comes to you with a news about a Muslim person or group, don't take action against them until fatabayyanu, until you investigate. Now, is it only for Walid? No. It applies to anyone. So you can replace al-fasiq with, CNN, for example, or Fox News. And the whole company there. So when they tell you something, you don't just make a judgment. Don't form a judgment in your mind about a Muslim, group or a nation or a community. Fatabayyanu, go and investigate. And so the ayat cannot be tied to the event, only in very, very specific situations. Mubahala only happened once and never happened again. The event of Ali giving the ring to a beggar in the state of ruku only happened once. Even if you do it 10 times, no ayat is going to come down for you. So those are exceptional cases. But in general, if you see an ayat coming in a context, it is relevant to that context, but the message is not limited. It is more universal. Now what happens in Talaq? In Talaq, basically what we see is the financial issues become more contagious, especially in Canadian system. And mashallah, men as well as women. There's no change in that nature of a human being. Both want to get the best from both systems. Court se bhi lena hai, Maulana se bhi lena hai. You tell them you go this way or that way. But no, they just see, okay, in this issue, this is better for me, I'll go this way. In this issue, this is good for me, we'll insist there on the Shari'i Talaq that it happens this way. And this is where we realize, okay, people have issues, they might be put into financial burden and difficulties, and this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that even if you go for the issue of divorce and talaq, remember taqwa, maintain the taqwa and awareness of Allah's presence in your life all the time. And if you go through loss of, wealth because of talaq, if you have taqwa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I promise that I'll take care of you. Now this is a promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The immediate context is of talaq, but the message is universal. Many people remember this ayat and the following line from ayat number 3, but they don't even connect this to issue of talaq, because the theme is so universal. And what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, and whoever وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, and whoever fears displeasing Allah. This italics I just added there to clarify the meaning. You don't fear Allah, you fear displeasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, he shall make a way out for him. وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ, and he will provide from him from whence he does not even reckon. He wouldn't even know where his risk is going to come from. وَمَنْ يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ, and whoever puts his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will suffice him. إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَالِغُ أَمْرِهِ, why? Because Allah implements His command when He wants to do something. وَقَدْ جَعَلَ اللَّهُ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدْرًا, certainly Allah has set a measure for everything. So He's giving us assurance after assurance on this issue. And so let us look at this ayat. Number one, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ makhrajan. Makhraj, khuruj, exit. And what it means is that a person is stuck in a situation. Financial problems, job difficulties, family difficulties, whether it is remarrying or whatever, it could be anything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِي, provided you have taqwa, I will find a way out for you. And the word yattaqi is the verb from taqwa, which means to fear displeasing Allah, or to be conscious of Allah, or to be wary of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, when we talk about this issue of the immediate context now comes in, the couple as well as the witnesses should not abandon justice in any case. If there are problems that they anticipate they will face because of financial issues there, then Allah says that there is a solution for it. And what is the solution? 2 words. One is taqwa, the other is tawakkul. Have this taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trust Him. If you really do that with total, belief and yaqeen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will find a makhraj for you. Now, as I mentioned earlier, although the verse is in the context of the divorce, and the addressees are the husband, the wife, and the 2 witnesses, but its message is universal. And the message is that, if people maintain taqwa of Allah and put their trust in Allah, Allah will find a way out for them from their problems and troubles. Sometimes we have situations where people would call me and say, Maulana, this is the opening, job opening in so-and-so company, this is the line of work, but there are shari'i problems there. And I say, if it is haram, it is haram. I can't make it halal for you. Just stay away from it, don't go into it. Although you don't see any opening immediately, but if you abandon that haram opening which is there for you, because of the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you fear displeasing Him, and therefore you did not accept that job which was available to you, يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, Allah will find you a way for you. Maybe that door will be closed, but He will open another door for you. And this is where you really have to trust Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you will see things can be resolved in a very good way. The power of this statement actually is number one, this issue of taqwa. And I would like to emphasize here by looking at the first verse. Remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that do the talaq at this time. So the timing was mentioned. Then before saying that you are not allowed to throw your wife out of your house during the time of iddah, before that He says, وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ رَبَّكُمْ. Fear Allah who is your Lord. So taqwa is emphasized in that first ayat also. And then we see in the second one, مَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. This is the end of the second ayat. And the theme that continues in the third ayat also. And this is where we come to realize that taqwa is a very powerful energy that Allah has created for us. It's a spiritual power. And what does it do? It actually prevents a person from committing sins. Sometimes we see taqwa, especially in our South Asian culture, with the words taqwa, muttaqi, parhezgar, these are the equivalents of that in Urdu or Farsi. It's on a subconscious level, we relate that to old people. Now that they are retired, they don't have anything else to do, they should become muttaqi and parhezgar. Whereas we have to realize that taqwa actually is there from the day a person becomes baligh or baligha. Actually, during the young age, you need taqwa more than the old age. Old age तो कुछ इरादा भी करना हो तो कुछ नहीं कर सकते. Huh? More temptation and possibilities of committing sins are more there when you are young. If you have the money and the free time and nobody is there, shaitan becomes your guide. And this is where we have to realize that taqwa is not something for the old age. I'm just remembering, I don't have the PowerPoints for it here. If you look at all the 12 Imams, each one of them has been given a special laqab. Ali is Murtaza, Hassan is Mushtaba, Hussein is Shaheed, Ali, the fourth Imam, is Zainul Abidin, fifth is Baqir, sixth is Sadiq, the seventh is Kazim, eighth is Rida, and the ninth Imam is at-Taqi, from Taqwa. If you look at the age, the Imam who started his Imamat at the youngest age of age 8 or 9 is Imam Muhammad Taqi. When I look at it, the way I see it, that there is a message there. That we are being told that taqwa is not for the old people. It is for the youngest of the Imam. We have reserved this title. Ali is also, he's not only Taqi, he is Imam al-Muttaqeen. But we have reserved this Taqi for the youngest of the 12 Imams. And to emphasize that this is not only for old age, only when we nothing else to do, so you go towards deen. No. Because taqwa is not, isolation. To go in a monastery somewhere and dedicate your time in worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or spending time in a cave. No, actually taqwa is that insulation that you carry on you even though you live in midst of an evil society. Some of our people say, we need to have Madina Fadila, the ideal Islamic society to move around. Well, the more challenge is when you are placed in an evil society. And that's where we want to see whether you are able to maintain your faith or not. And so that is the meaning of taqwa. It is more a vaccination. So then you can move around even in the area where there is spiritual disease, but you are not affected by it. And this is where Amir al-Mu'minin says, remember, taqwa is a hisn. It is a castle which protects you. And then he says, he has something very powerful statement in Al-Balagha where he says, taqwa can only protect you if you protect the taqwa. It means it's not something, you can just, a solid item you buy and keep it. It has that potential of becoming weaker and diminishing. So you have to work, constantly build on maintaining and, energizing your taqwa. Only then it will be able to protect you. And so there are different levels of taqwa, and I don't really want to go into details of that, but just two examples. One is, of course, for the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for them, taqwa means that, they never, in no situation do they miss the presence of Allah in their lives. For us, Imam al-Muttaqeen is Ali. And he says, مَا رَأَيْتُ شَيْئًا, I have not seen anything. إِلَّا وَرَأَيْتُ اللَّهَ مَعَهُ قَبْلُهُ أَوْ مَعَهُ وَفِيهِ أَوْ بَعْدُهُ. There are different versions of it. That, I have not seen anything, but that I see Allah before it, and after it, and alongside it. You remember this entire story of Khandaq. He is there. Baraz al-Iman kullu. He is the total Iman, representing the entire Ummah at that time. Fighting against somebody, Amr ibn Abdawud, who is total kufr. And what happens? They attack one another. He was a very courageous person also. And he actually injured Amir al-Mu'minin on his forehead. This is the same place where later on, years later, Ibn Muljam Mal'un struck his sword. It was really on the same line. And so Imam was injured, but he was eventually able to overcome Amr ibn Abdawud, threw him on the ground, got on him to finish him off. At that moment, Amr ibn Abdawud, what does he do? He spat on the blessed face of Amir al-Mu'mineen. At that moment, nobody will sit down and think about it. He is there. He is the salvation of the ummah, the protection of the ummah. The baqa of the ummah depends on him. He would not care about anything else. But this was not anyone else. This was Ali. He stood up. Took a few steps back before going and finishing him. And the Sahaba there were sitting there like, according to Tabari, with birds sitting on their heads, and they didn't want to disturb the birds. So motionless. Out of fear of Amr ibn Abdawud, they actually asked Rasulullah, what is he doing? And Rasulullah said, you ask him when he comes back. And this is where we see that Ali said, at that moment I became angry. And I did not want my anger and ghazab to be part of the motivation of killing him. I wanted to kill him only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I took 2 steps back to calm my anger down, kadhmul ghayz, and then I went and finished my job. And this is the level of taqwa of the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's just for us to get some inspiration from the Imam that we follow. But of course, we are there on the general level here. And what taqwa means for us is to constantly, remember Allah, so that if a temptation comes along the way, where shaitan wants to deviate us from the right path and commit sin, if we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be able to refrain from it. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now we come to the issue of what is the result of that. The first sentence from ayat number 3. وَيَرْزُقُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Whoever fears displeasing Allah, He shall make a way out for him and provide for him from where he does not even reckon. We don't even dream where his rizq is going to come from. Now, the result of taqwa basically are 2 things based on this ayat. And this is the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 1, Allah will make a way out for the muttaqeen, out of their problem and the difficulty that they face. Number 2, coming to rizq, Allah will provide for them from where they did not even expect. And so this is where we are told that so believers should not fear that by exercising taqwa and respecting the limits, the hududullah that Allah mentioned in the earlier ayat, that which has been imposed on them, that they will be deprived from the good things of this dunya and suffer because of restrained sustenance. Why? Because rizq and sustenance is Allah's promise, and He is fully capable of fulfilling His promise, as the ayat will come later on. This statement, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, it is so powerful that we have a narration from Abu Zar al-Ghafari, a very prominent Sahabi of the Prophet, where he says, I heard the Prophet, إِنِّي لَا أَعْلَمُ آيَةً لَوْ أَخَذَ بِهَا النَّاسِ لَكَفَتْهُمْ, that I don't know of any ayat other than this one, that if the people hold on to it, that will suffice them. Allah will be the protector for them. And then he recites, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا فَمَا زَالَ يَقُولُهَا وَيَعُودُهَا. And the Prophet, just continued repeating the words, وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. And this is where we see that it is a very powerful statement, provided we fulfill our part of the bargain with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a promise from Allah, provided we have that taqwa. And the tawakkul, which will come, inshallah, we'll talk about it tomorrow. There is actually a story that some of the Mufassirin also relate to this ayat, where there was a person by the name of Aun bin Malik, whose son was captured by the enemies. And he was a poor person. He goes to the Prophet and complains. And the Prophet advised him that I ask you to maintain taqwa and sabr, and to always remember Allah by saying La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah, which means that there is no power and strength but with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This fellow, goes away. The Prophet didn't recite any dua, anything, just said, maintain taqwa and sabr, and remember Allah by saying La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. It was very soon after that, whether same day or next day, I'm not sure, the narration doesn't mention that he was sitting at home when he saw his son, came free. He said, I just, found an opportunity where the enemy were not, vigilant, and so I just took one of the camels or horse and just ran away from there. And this is where, when he came back, this is where, the Prophet talks about this issue. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. And so we have to keep this in mind, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised this for us. Let me end with two hadiths on this issue. We're just running out of time here. But anyway, very quick. The Prophet talked about this taqwa. Where will it help you? Number one, he says it will protect you min shubahat ad-dunya, confusions that you might face in this dunya. Whether it is to do whether you should work in this line or the other line, or should you follow this way or that way, or different confusing situations in dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the taqwa will be able to help you. Number two, min ghamarat al-maut, agonies of death. So at the time of death also that taqwa will come to relieve the person from the agony of death. And number three, وَشَدَائِدِ يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ, the difficulties that the people will face on the day of judgment. The last statement is from Amir al-Mu'mineen, where he says, وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّهُ مَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا مِنَ الْفِتَنِ وَنُورًا مِنَ الظُّلَمِ. That whoever maintains taqwa, the same ayat he recites, Allah will find a way out for him from the fitan, means challenges and the temptations, and will provide nuran min al-dhulam, will give you the light in darkness to find the path. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.